Decades before billion-dollar broadcasting contracts and manicured artificial turf, college football existed as a blood sport in its most primitive and visceral incarnation. The year 1905 didn't merely present the game with an injury crisis. It confronted a mounting mortality rate that threatened the sport's very existence. During that catastrophic season, no fewer than 19 young men perished on playing fields across America, while another 137 sustained injuries that would permanently alter the trajectory of their lives. The principal architect of this carnage was the notorious flying wedge, a mass momentum formation where athletes interlocked their arms and surged forward like a human demolition device. Forward passing didn't exist. Sophisticated tactical approaches were absent. Only pure, devastating physical collision remained. Protective headgear consisted of soft leather caps that offered scarcely more defense than ordinary winter headwear, and the very notion of participant. Protection was completely foreign to the sporting culture of the era. The newspaper coverage of that period, spearheaded by the Chicago Tribune's relentless reporting, branded it a death harvest. The brutality became so publicized and so horrifying, with young men succumbing to cerebral hemorrhages and crushed rib cages before crowds numbering in the thousands, that President Theodore Roosevelt felt compelled to intervene directly. He convened the leadership of Harvard, Yale, and Princeton at the White House, delivering an unambiguous ultimatum: transform the game fundamentally or face its complete abolition through presidential decree. This pivotal moment gave birth to the forward pass, conceived not through strategic innovation, but through desperate, blood-soaked necessity to cease burying students in coffins. It stands as the most perilous year in American sporting history, an era when the football field functioned as an actual burial ground, and the sports continued. Existence hinged entirely on its capacity to stop exterminating its own participants. The Booster from Hell, Nevin Shapiro, 2011. Throughout the opening decade of the 2000s, the University of Miami reigned as the undisputed bad boy epicenter of the football universe. They possessed the confidence, the championship hardware, and the iconic U emblazoned across their helmets. Yet beneath that supremacy lurked a shadowy puppet master named Nevin Shapiro. Shapiro occupied no coaching position nor possessed any athletic credentials. He was a Ponzi scheme architect presiding over a $900 million fraudulent enterprise driven by a pathological compulsion for proximity to the elite sphere of collegiate athletics. Throughout nearly 10 years, Shapiro transformed the Miami football operation into his exclusive domain. He didn't merely distribute improper benefits. He constructed an alternative, illicit universe encompassing 72 distinct players. The scope included yacht celebrations, premium, hotel accommodations, and $5,000 bounties for injuring opposing players from Florida or Florida State. Shapiro even boasted openly about financing an abortion for one player's girlfriend to prevent a potential scandal from reaching public consciousness. He craved recognition as the King of Miami, exploiting the Hurricanes as his royal court. When his fraudulent financial empire inevitably imploded and he received a 20-year federal prison sentence, he refused to accept his fate silently. From within his prison cell, he transformed into an informant, systematically dismantling the program and exposing a magnitude of corruption unprecedented in NCAA enforcement history. The scandal transcended mere monetary transactions. It illuminated how effortlessly a program's fundamental identity can be purchased by the wealthiest bidder when the quest for swagger supersedes the pursuit of genuine integrity. The Punter's Ambush, Mitch Kozad, 2006. Within the tranquil, specialized realm of special teams operations, the punter typically occupies the most protected position on the field, safeguarded by regulations, distance, and proximity to the sideline. However, at Northern Colorado University, the competition for the starting position didn't conclude when practice ended. It migrated into the darkness of a campus parking facility. This wasn't a legitimate competition of hang time statistics or leg power. It represented a premeditated assassination attempt targeting a teammate's professional future. Mitch Kozad wasn't searching for improved technique. He was searching for a weapon. Rafael Mendoza represented the obstacle. Kozad embodied the predator. In the darkness of a September evening, the backup punter exchanged his athletic footwear for a disguise and waited. When Mendoza approached his vehicle, he wasn't confronted by a competing athlete, but by a calculated ambush. The assault was precise and merciless. Kozad deliberately targeted Mendoza's kicking leg, the specific limb that separated him from the starting lineup. It constituted a jagged, frantic attempt to carve a pathway onto the field through bone and muscle tissue. Media coverage eventually characterized the stabbing punter as an absurd footnote, but the underlying reality proved far more sinister. This wasn't a practical joke gone catastrophically wrong. It manifested as the depth chart transformed into an execution order. It revealed a twisted psychological decay where the fixation with achieving number one status eclipsed the inherent value of human existence. Kozad exchanged his football jersey for a prison uniform and a second-degree assault conviction, bequeathing a disturbing legacy. A stark reminder that when competitive spirit festers unchecked in darkness, it doesn't forge champions, it manufactures monsters. The Tower of Negligence, Declan Sullivan, 2010. Within the high-pressure machinery of elite collegiate football operations, the eye in the sky holds sacred status, the aerial footage that documents every movement, every error, every tactical secret of the gridiron battlefield. But on October 27, 2010, the relentless pursuit of the ideal filming angle transformed into a death sentence. Declan Sullivan wasn't a linebacker or a highly recruited prospect. He was a 20-year-old student videographer at Notre Dame, assigned the responsibility of recording practice sessions from the precarious elevation of a scissor lift. As a vicious South Bend storm system approached, with wind velocities screaming at 50 miles per hour, the boundary between routine practice documentation and fatal gambling disintegrated completely. Sullivan recognized his impending doom, broadcasting via Twitter that the swaying of his metal platform was terrifying, yet the coaching whistle never sounded. The program required the footage. The All-22 film analysis was considered more critical than the existence of the individual recording it. Extended 50 feet upward into a sky that had transformed hostile, the lift ultimately surrendered to the wind's force, toppling like a felled redwood and crushing Sullivan's life in a single instant. This wasn't an unavoidable natural disaster. It represented a consequence of institutional hubris. The National Weather Service had broadcast warnings that were systematically ignored, and safety procedures were sacrificed upon the altar of convenience and coaching fixation. The aftermath exposed a damning revelation of a football-first mentality where the invisible personnel, the students, the interns, the laborers operating in obscurity, are regarded as expendable casualties. It persists as a haunting accusation against the coaching power structure, a reminder that when a program surrenders its conscience to the obsessive pursuit of an undefeated season, the players aren't the only ones who suffer the consequences. Declan Sullivan's death materialized as tragedy spawned from pure, calculated negligence, a moment when the Golden Dome was permanently stained by the realization that, for certain individuals, the film footage held greater value than the human being filming it. The Silent Predator, Todd Hodney, 1978. Long before Jerry Sandusky obliterated the reputation of Penn State, there existed Todd Hodney. During the late 1970s, Hodney served as a linebacker for Joe Paterno, a coach whose success with honor philosophy represented the university's foundational principle. Yet Hodney maintained a dual existence. While dressed in legendary blue and white uniforms on Saturdays, he was stalking women throughout State College during weekdays. He transcended mere criminality. He operated as a serial predator, characterized by law enforcement as among the most physically intimidating and dangerous individuals ever pursued. He perpetrated a succession of savage sexual assaults, targeting university students and local mothers indiscriminately. The most disturbing element involves the lost decades, the manner in which the program advanced beyond his arrest and expulsion without ever confronting the darkness he abandoned in his wake. For 40 years, his narrative remained a minor footnote, buried beneath the accumulating weight of national championships and Paterno's expanding mythology. When the Sandusky scandal erupted in 2011, the truth crystallized. The culture of silence wasn't a recent phenomenon. It constituted a tradition of protection cultivated across 40 years, commencing with an individual who barely registered an impact on the playing field, yet left a devastating trail of victims concealed in shadows. The heat stroke tragedy, Jordan McNair. 2018. Within the realm of elite football operations, toughness frequently gets measured by the suffering a player can withstand. At the University of Maryland, that philosophical approach became lethal. During an outdoor training session amid oppressive May heat conditions, 19-year-old Jordan McNair collapsed, following a sequence of 110-yard sprints. As McNair's core body temperature escalated to a fatal 106 degrees, the coaching personnel failed to respond with appropriate urgency. No cold water immersion existed, the universally accepted gold standard for heat stroke treatment that should attend every practice session. Instead, his organ systems failed beneath the relentless heat, and he perished 2 weeks afterward. The subsequent investigation exposed a toxic culture directed by head coach DJ Durkin, where players faced ridicule for displaying distress and mental toughness received prioritization over medical necessity. McNair didn't perish from an unpredictable accident. He died because the individuals compensated to protect him demonstrated greater interest in breaking him than maintaining his survival. It remains a watershed moment for participant safety protocols. Chilling evidence that old-school grit constitutes a death sentence when negligence disguises itself as discipline. The Honor Code. Crisis, West Point, 1951. Within the revered halls of West Point, leadership gets forged upon a singular, unbreakable commandment: the Honor Code. A cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal. However, in 1951, that moral foundation didn't merely crack. It completely disintegrated beneath the pressure of a football program consumed by winning obsession. That season, the academy didn't simply lose games. It forfeited its fundamental soul. 90 cadets were expelled in a massive academic fraud scandal, with nearly 40 of them constituting the very stars who wore the varsity gold. This wasn't an administrative oversight. It represented a systematic conspiracy. Players were distributing exam answers like contraband merchandise, treating the classroom as an obstacle to be overcome through any available means to maintain field eligibility. The repercussions constituted a nuclear event for the American military establishment. At a historical moment when legends like Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis had elevated Army to national powerhouse status, the scandal revealed corruption festering at the core of the nation's future officer corps. It transcended mere grades. It concerned the integrity of the men destined to command troops in combat situations. The pursuit of gridiron glory had evolved into a villain that corrupted the Academy's sacred mission, triggering a congressional investigation that placed the entire sport on trial. The 1951 team withered to a 2-7 record as the roster underwent gutting. But the authentic cost manifested as a permanent scar upon the long gray line. It endures as a chilling reminder: when a game receives permission to become too big to fail, even the most honorable institutions will exchange their conscience for a scoreboard. The invisible injury. Tyler Hilinski. 2018. Tyler Hilinski was the charismatic embodiment of Washington State football, a gifted quarterback with his complete future stretching before him, yet in January 2018, that future terminated by his own hand within a quiet Pullman apartment. No warning indicators existed, no audible pleas for assistance. The devastating truth emerged only during the autopsy. At merely 21 years old, Hilinski possessed the brain tissue of a 65-year-old individual suffering from stage 1 CTE. The primary perpetrator wasn't a single, bone-jarring collision, but the thousands of routine, subconcussive impacts that had physically deteriorated his mind's biochemistry. This represented a biological warfare disguised as athletic competition. His death recontextualized the invisible cost of the gridiron, demonstrating that the impacts we don't witness are frequently the most lethal. Through Hilinski's hope, his legacy persists as a haunting reminder that players often combat internal battles they don't comprehend. It stands as a grim testament to the reality that for some individuals, the price of the sport isn't merely a temporary injury. It constitutes the slow, silent annihilation of the self. The Sideline Assault, Woody Hayes, 1978. The Gator Bowl Detonation, 1978. During the era of the God Coach, Woody Hayes transcended mere leadership. He embodied an untouchable institution. With 5 national championships and 28 years of dominance, he commanded greater authority in Columbus than any elected official. But Hayes was an individual governed by a volatile, unrestrained temperament, a ticking explosive device that finally detonated on national television broadcast. The catalyst was a late-game interception by Clemson's Charlie Bauman, a play that effectively signaled the conclusion of Ohio State's season and the fracturing of Hayes' composure. As Bauman was forced out of bounds near the Ohio State sideline, the frustration of a fading legacy boiled over into a moment of absolute madness. The 65-year-old legend lunged forward and struck the young athlete in the throat before a stunned national television audience. It transcended mere physical assault. It represented the public suicide of a legendary coaching career. By the subsequent morning, the God Coach had vanished. Hayes was terminated, concluding his tenure not with a trophy, but with a disgrace that would define his legacy eternally. The punch signaled the death of an era where victories provided complete immunity, proving that no quantity of championship gold can insulate an individual from his own internal corruption when it gets unleashed upon a public stage. The Mid-Flight Massacre, Marshall University. 1970. November 14, 1970, remains the darkest entry within the ledger of American sports history. Marshall University's football team was returning from a difficult loss at East Carolina, but they would never complete their homeward journey. On board Southern Airways Flight 932 were 75 souls, players, coaches, and the town's most prominent boosters and supporters. As the aircraft descended through a suffocating, rain-soaked fog toward Deauville, the tri-state airport, it clipped a stand of trees mere yards short of the runway and crashed into a hillside. The impact was absolutely cataclysmic. 0 survivors emerged. In a single, violent instant, an entire community's heart was violently ripped away. Huntington wasn't a major metropolitan area. It was a town where everyone personally knew the players, and overnight, dozens of children were transformed into orphans. The body count was so absolutely total that the administration seriously contemplated burying the program permanently. The grief was paralyzing, a burden that threatened to sink the entire university institution. Yet, from the wreckage emerged the young thundering herd, a team comprised of walk-ons and freshmen forced to compete through the trauma. The Marshall crash serves as a haunting reminder of life's fragility, proving that while an aircraft can erase a program from the map, a community spirit proves far more difficult to extinguish the betrayal of Tito. Lizzie Seeberg, Notre Dame, 2010. While the 2010 headlines at Notre Dame were consumed by the death of Declan Sullivan, a quieter, equally devastating tragedy was festering within the shadows. Elizabeth Lizzie Seeberg was a 19-year-old student who filed a sexual assault report against a high-profile football player. What followed constituted a masterclass in institutional coldness and indifference. Instead of sanctuary and support, Seeberg was confronted with a campaign of psychological warfare. Threatening messages from the locker room inundated her phone, warning that her life would be over if she dared to challenge the program. Don't do anything you would regret. For Seeberg, the pressure became an actual death sentence. 10 days following her report, overwhelmed by a system stacked completely against her, she took her own life. The investigation into the alleged assault didn't even commence in earnest until she was buried, and no criminal charges were ever filed. The university stood accused of prioritizing the protection of its stars over the survival of its students. It remains a stinging indictment of an athlete-first justice system, a story of a victim silenced by a culture that perceived her as nothing beyond a threat to the Saturday afternoon scoreboard. The Charlottesville Ambush, UVA, 2022. On a frigid November night in 2022, the University of Virginia was reminded that the world's violence can penetrate even the closest-knit brotherhoods. A charter bus was returning to campus following a class field trip to Washington, D.C. On that bus were the lifeblood of the UVA program, young men like Laval Davis Jr., Devin Chandler, and Deshaun Perry. But as the vehicle pulled into the sanctuary of a campus parking garage, the brotherhood was shattered by a hail of gunfire. The primary perpetrator wasn't an outside intruder, but a fellow student and former teammate who transformed the bus into a kill zone. 3 lives were extinguished in seconds. 2 others were left bleeding. For 12 agonizing hours, Charlottesville was plunged into a terrifying lockdown as a manhunt gripped the city. The evidence left behind was a trail of missed warning signs. The shooter had been on the university's radar for months, flagged for behavioral red flags and weapon possession that were never neutralized. It wasn't merely a random act, it was a systemic failure of intervention. The tragedy left a program shattered and a season canceled, forcing the sporting world to confront a chilling reality. Sometimes, the most lethal danger isn't the opponent on the field, but the predator within the home. The Shrek Rituals, Northwestern's Systemic Rot, 2023. Within the world of elite athletics, tradition serves as the protective shield used to conceal a sophisticated system of degradation. At Northwestern University, the locker room, intended to be a sanctuary of brotherhood, was transformed into a dark chamber of anxiety and ritualized abuse. This wasn't merely a few rogue athletes acting independently, it was a culture of sanctioned humiliation. Freshmen were subjected to the run, a harrowing ritual where they were forced into a lightless room to be shucked by upperclassmen wearing masks. Even more visceral were the Shrek Rituals, a name employed to sanitize acts of sexual humiliation and psychological trauma. The villain in this narrative was the system itself operating unchecked. If a player failed on the field, his name was marked on a locker room whiteboard, a public death warrant for his dignity. He knew what was approaching. When the 17-year tenure of head coach Pat Fitzgerald finally detonated in a national scandal, it exposed the coaching industrial complex and the unbridled power granted to those at the pinnacle. The Northwestern disaster wasn't merely a failure of leadership, it was a criminal indictment of toughening up gone catastrophically wrong. It proved that, Even in a program constructed on smart football, the hunger for victory creates a vacuum where morality becomes the first sacrifice on the altar of the scoreboard. The Minnesota Mutiny: Loyalty versus Justice, 2016. In 2016, the University of Minnesota Gophers provided a chilling case study in how team chemistry can be weaponized to obstruct justice. When 10 players were suspended following a sexual assault investigation, the entire roster accomplished the unthinkable. They initiated a strike. Standing shoulder to shoulder in their jerseys for a televised press conference, they proclaimed their brothers were victims of a broken system. This wasn't a protest, it was a high-stakes power play. By threatening to boycott the Holiday Bowl, the team held the university's multi-million-dollar revenue and national reputation hostage to protect their own. For 48 hours, the narrative constituted a battle of due process versus bureaucracy. The players were framed as heroes by those who bought into the locker room code. But the villain wasn't the administration. It was the truth buried within an 82-page internal report. When the document leaked, it detailed a level of depravity that turned the public's stomach. It described a victim physically overwhelmed and mocked, subjected to a group assault that the participants had the audacity to film and preserve. The graphic reality of the evidence, bolstered by the players' own video footage, caused the mutiny to evaporate overnight. The support vanished, leaving behind a literal wreck of a reputation. The players returned to practice, but the stain was permanent. It exposed a fundamental rot in the modern athlete's psyche, the dangerous belief that blind loyalty and the bond of the brotherhood stand above the laws of the land. The SMU death penalty, 1987. While numerous scandals explode, in a single moment of violence, the Southern Methodist University disaster of the 1980s was the slow-motion suicide of an entire program. It remains the only time in history the NCAA executed a major football powerhouse, delivering the dreaded death penalty. In the early 80s, SMU was a titan of the turf, propelled by the legendary Pony Express backfield of Eric Dickerson and Craig James. They were the undisputed kings of the Southwest Conference, but their throne was constructed on a foundation of systematic bribery and institutionalized rot. The primary culprit was a sophisticated slush fund, a secret payroll sanctioned by high-ranking officials that transformed amateur athletes into salaried employees. This wasn't a collection of rogue handshakes. It was a professional financial operation with accounting ledgers. When the NCAA investigators first came knocking, the program didn't flinch. They lied with a sense of total invincibility. The arrogance was absolute. The boosters and board members believed the program was too wealthy and too influential to be dismantled. But in 1987, the NCAA finally pulled the plug. The death penalty didn't just penalize the team. It erased them from existence, canceling the entire 1987 season and stripping away their future. The program didn't just stumble, it vanished, becoming a literal ghost of its former self for decades to come. It stands as the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when a financial win-at-all-costs culture devours the mission of a university. The Pony Express didn't just run out of gas. It was put down by the very system it tried to outrun. The Baylor Horror, 2016. In the heart of Texas, Art Briles transformed Baylor University into a national powerhouse, fueled by an explosive offense that seemed absolutely unstoppable. But behind the record-breaking scores was a terrifying body count of a different kind altogether. Under the glory of the gridiron, the football program had become a law unto itself, a literal sanctuary for predators. This wasn't just a failure of oversight. It was a systematic operation to suppress, ignore, and bury a string of sexual assaults committed by the very players the fans enthusiastically cheered for on Saturdays. The villain was a culture that viewed women as collateral damage in the relentless pursuit of a Big 12 championship. Victims who dared to speak were met with a wall of silence, their reports vanishing into a bureaucratic void created by an athletic department more interested in protecting the roster than safeguarding the student body. When the corruption finally detonated, it triggered a total purge of university leadership and the firing of Briles. But for the survivors, the resolution brought no genuine peace. It remains a staggering indictment of win-at-all-costs recruiting, a reminder that when a program is allowed to operate in the shadows, the scoreboard becomes a protective shield for the most heinous. Conclusion: the ledger of the game. We watch college football for the heroics. We watch for the last-second touchdowns and the underdog stories that make us believe in the impossible. But as we've witnessed, the cost of that entertainment is often written in blood, silence, and broken lives. From the frozen fields of West Point to the humid practice dirt of Maryland, the dark side of the game is always present, lurking just beyond the camera's lens. It is a world where institutional protection operates as a reflex, and human safety is treated as an afterthought. We remember the names on the back of the jerseys, but we must also remember the names of the victims: Declan Sullivan, Jordan McNair, Lizzie Seeberg, Tyler Hilinski, and the countless others whose stories were buried to keep the brand alive and profitable. The scoreboard tells us who won the game on any given Saturday. But the stories we've told today tell us something far more important. They tell us what we've collectively lost. The next time you hear the thunderous roar of a Saturday crowd, ask yourself, what is the true price of the game we love? And more importantly, who is the one actually paying it? If you want to see the stories they desperately try to keep concealed in the shadows, subscribe and hit the bell notification. We aren't finished looking behind the curtain of this beloved sport. Thanks for watching.